Section 1. Divine Origins. In the world of Vana'diel, where adventurers walk paths both perilous and profound, there exists a calling that transcends the mere wielding of power. It is a calling born not of ambition, but of devotion. It is the path of the White Mage. Long ago, when the world was young and the goddess Altana gazed upon her creation with eyes of infinite compassion, she saw the suffering of mortals. She witnessed their pain, their fear, their fragile lives flickering like candles in an endless night. And in her mercy, she chose to share with them a fragment of her divine essence, not as a gift freely given to all, but as a sacred trust bestowed upon those with hearts pure enough to channel it. These chosen few would become the first White Mages, arbiters of divine will, vessels through which the goddess herself would touch the world. They would not draw upon their own meager life force, as hedge witches and desperate conjurers might. No, they would become conduits for something far greater, the very power of creation and restoration that flows from the divine realm itself. In Vana'diel, magic takes many forms. There is the destructive fury of black magic, which bends the elements to break and shatter. There are the subtle arts of red magic, which blur the lines between disciplines. But white magic stands apart, singular in its purpose and sacred in its origins. It is not merely another school of arcane study to be mastered through intellect alone. It is a covenant, a bond between mortal and divine, between the servant and the served. The White Mage does not command magic, they channel it. They do not impose their will upon reality. They become instruments through which holiness flows. Every spell, every blessing, every miracle performed by a White Mage is an act of faith made manifest, a prayer given form and substance in the material world. This distinction matters deeply. Where a Black Mage might study the principles of combustion and learn to summon fire through understanding, a White Mage knows that their healing light comes from a source beyond themselves. It humbles them. It shapes them. It transforms them into something more than mere practitioners of an art. They become living symbols of hope, walking reminders that even in the darkest corners of Vana'diel, the divine has not abandoned its children. And so, from the earliest days, White Mages have walked a different path. Their magic is not won through hours in dusty libraries alone, though study has its place. It is earned through devotion, through service, through the daily discipline of opening one's heart to something greater. It is rooted in holiness and restoration, in the fundamental belief that life is sacred and worth preserving, that death is not an ending to be rushed toward but a boundary to be held at bay for as long as the goddess wills. This is the foundation upon which all else is built. This is where every White Mage's journey begins, not with a spell memorized or a technique mastered, but with a calling answered, a divine invitation accepted, and a sacred duty embraced. Section 2. The Calling and Sacred Purpose. To wear the white robes is to accept a burden that most could never bear. It is to stand between life and death, between hope and despair, and to choose, again and again, in moment after moment, to fight for life. The White Mage represents the premier healer role in all of Vana'diel, but this is more than a mere designation of function. It is a calling that shapes every aspect of their existence. From the moment they don the white robes with their distinctive red trim, they become publicly marked as servants of holy magic. No longer are they simply individuals pursuing their own fortunes. They are clergy-like figures whose very presence reminds others that the divine still watches over the realm. Picture, if you will, a small village on the frontier, where settlers struggle to carve out a life from unforgiving wilderness. When illness strikes, when children fall fever-hot and delirious, when injuries fester and turn dark with infection, it is the White Mage they call for. Not the warrior with his blade, not the Black Mage with her destructive power, but the one who wears the white robes. The one who carries the blessing of Altana. This is their purpose, to preserve life and protect allies. But what does this mean in practice? What does it mean to accept this duty not just as a role to play, but as a fundamental identity? It means rising before dawn to offer prayers for those you will meet that day. It means studying not just the mechanics of healing spells, but the spiritual principles that allow divine power to flow through mortal hands. It means understanding that every life you touch, from the mightiest warrior to the humblest merchant, carries infinite value in the eyes of the goddess. White mages minister to both commoners and adventurers with equal dedication. In the great cities, they tend to the sick in houses of healing, offering comfort to the dying and hope to those who yet cling to life. In the field, they march alongside parties of adventurers into dungeons deep and dangerous, standing ready to call back those who fall, to mend wounds that would otherwise prove fatal, to shield their companions from forces that would tear them apart. But this ministry is not without its costs. To be a white mage is to feel the weight of every life that slips through your fingers despite your best efforts. It is to know that you carry power that could save, but to also know that power has limits. Limits imposed not by lack of skill, but by the will of the goddess herself, by the natural order that even divine magic must sometimes respect. The white robes with red trim are not worn lightly. They are recognized across Vana'diel as symbols of hope and mercy. When others see those robes approaching, they know that help walks among them. Children learn from their earliest days that the ones in white are to be trusted, to be turned to in times of need. The robes are a promise that someone stands ready to give of themselves, to channel the divine, to fight for life when death comes calling. And so white mages live in a state of constant readiness. They do not merely react to crisis, they prepare for it through daily devotion, through regular communion with the divine source of their power. They understand that healing is not just a matter of knowing which spell to cast, but of maintaining the spiritual discipline that keeps the channel open between themselves and Altana. They are not battlefield medics, coldly efficient and detached. They are not mere technicians of restoration. They are servants of the holy, driven by a purpose that transcends survival and touches upon the sacred mystery of existence itself. Every life preserved is an affirmation of the goddess's love for her creation. Every death prevented is a small victory against the darkness that ever seeks to claim the world. This is the calling. This is the purpose. And those who truly embrace it find that it transforms them utterly until they can no longer imagine living any other way. Section 3. The Sacred Healing Arts. There is a moment that every white mage knows intimately, the moment when desperation gives way to hope, when pain yields to relief, when death's cold grip loosens and life floods back into a body that was moments from becoming a corpse. It is in these moments that the true nature of white magic reveals itself, not as mere technique, but as blessing. The curative spells, Cure, Kuraga, Regan, are the foundation of every white mage's practice, but to call them simply spells is to miss their essential character. They are not formulas recited and energy expelled. They are prayers made manifest, invocations that open a channel through which benevolent divine energy flows into the world. When a white mage casts Cure upon a wounded ally, they do not impose their will upon reality. Instead, they humble themselves before the goddess and ask, "Please, let your healing grace flow through me to this one who suffers." And if their heart is pure, if their faith is strong, if the goddess wills it, then light blooms from their hands and pours into the wounded, knitting flesh, mending bone, driving back the darkness of injury and pain. Kuraga takes this blessing and expands it outward, a wave of holy restoration that washes over multiple allies at once. Imagine standing in the midst of battle, surrounded by companions bloodied and battered, and feeling the divine power surge through you like a river overflowing its banks. You raise your hands and speak the words of power, and light cascades from you in all directions, touching everyone within reach, binding wounds, restoring strength, renewing hope. This is the art of the white mage at its most profound, turning the tide of battle not through violence, but through the radical act of preservation. And then there is Regan, perhaps the most elegant expression of white magic's philosophy. Rather than a single burst of healing, Regan establishes an ongoing connection between the divine and the recipient, a sustained blessing that continues to restore over time. It is healing as patient grace, as the gentle but persistent affirmation that life will endure, that the body's natural regeneration will be supernaturally enhanced, that the goddess's attention remains fixed upon her child until they are made whole once more. But the healing arts extend beyond the mending of physical wounds. White mages are also masters of protection, wielders of spiritual wards that shield allies from the hostile forces of the world. The bar spells, bar fire, bar blizzard, bar thunder, and their kindred are not mere magical shields. They are invocations of holy protection, prayers that call upon Altana to interpose her divine will between the protected and the harmful. When a white mage casts bar fire upon a warrior about to face a dragon's flames, they are essentially saying, "Goddess, let your power stand between this one and the fire that would consume them. Let your light be a barrier against destruction." These wards draw upon the same sacred source as healing magic, but manifest differently. Rather than repairing damage after it occurs, they prevent it from occurring in the first place. They are proactive expressions of care, anticipatory acts of love. The white mage who carefully applies bar spells before a dangerous encounter is thinking ahead, considering what threats their allies will face, and doing everything in their power to ensure those allies survive. But perhaps no aspect of white magic better demonstrates its sacred nature than the spells of resurrection, raise, and its more powerful forms. Death is the great boundary, the threshold beyond which the living cannot follow. When a companion falls in battle, their spirit begins its journey to whatever lies beyond the mortal realm. The body grows cold. The light fades from their eyes. In most circumstances, this would be final. This would be the end of their story. But the white mage possesses the power to call that wandering soul back, to reverse death itself, not through dark necromancy or unholy bargaining with forces best left alone, but through the pure exercise of divine authority. Raise is a miracle, plain and simple. It is the white mage standing at the boundary between life and death and declaring, "Not yet. The goddess is not finished with you yet. Return." The mechanics of resurrection speak to its profound nature. The spell does not merely restart a stopped heart or force breath back into still lungs. It calls to the soul itself, sending out a beacon of holy light into whatever realm the dead briefly inhabit, and guides that soul back to its abandoned body. It requires immense faith, tremendous spiritual strength, because the white mage is asking the goddess to bend one of the fundamental rules of existence, that death is final. And she answers. Again and again, across countless battlefields and in countless moments of crisis, Altana answers. The fallen draw breath. Their eyes flutter open. Life returns, sometimes weak and fragile, but returned nonetheless. Death has been denied, not through force or trickery, but through divine mercy channeled by a faithful servant. This is the sacred healing art in its totality, not just the mending of wounds, but the preservation of life in all its forms, the protection against harm, and even the reversal of death itself. These are not the tools of a mere support class. These are miracles, blessings, acts of divine intervention made possible through human devotion. Section 4. Light against corruption. Though the white mage is known first and foremost as a healer, there exists within their sacred repertoire a darker purpose, or perhaps, more accurately, a brighter one. For the same divine power that restores life and mends wounds can also be turned against that which corrupts and destroys. The light that heals can also purify, and what cannot withstand purification must be destroyed. This is not a contradiction. This is holy justice. In Vana'diel, evil takes many forms. Some are natural, predators that hunt, creatures that defend territory, beasts that kill to survive. These are not the concern of holy wrath. But there are other things in the world, things that should not exist, abominations that represent fundamental violations of the natural order. The undead who refuse to accept death's embrace. The demons who crawl up from infernal realms. The corrupted beings who have willingly embraced darkness and turned against the light that birthed them. Against these, the white mage wields spells of devastating holy power. Banish is the first and most fundamental of these weapons. It manifests as pure radiance, light so intense and concentrated that it burns away corruption like morning sun burning away fog. When cast upon unholy creatures, particularly the undead, Banish inflicts terrible damage, not because it is destructive in the way fire or lightning are destructive, but because it is fundamentally incompatible with their existence. They are darkness, and Banish is light, and the two cannot occupy the same space. One must yield, and it will not be the light. Picture a white mage standing before a horde of animated corpses, shambling things that mock the sacred boundary between life and death. The white mage raises their staff, speaks words of power, and brilliance erupts from their form. The light strikes the undead like a physical force, and they recoil, shrieking, as the holy radiance burns through them. Some crumble to dust instantly. Others flee, unable to withstand even proximity to such sanctity. This is not cruelty. This is the universe correcting an error, restoring balance, asserting that death, once claimed, should not be reversed by profane means. And then there is Holy, the ultimate expression of white magic's offensive potential. Holy is not simply a more powerful version of Banish. It is transcendent, a spell that approaches the theoretical limits of divine intervention in the mortal realm. When a white mage casts Holy, they channel so much sacred power that reality itself seems to strain under the weight of it. Pillars of radiance erupt from the ground. The air fills with the sound of celestial bells or angelic choirs. Accounts vary, but all agree that Holy's manifestation is overwhelming to the senses. The damage Holy inflicts is immense, but more than that, it is indiscriminate in its judgment. Where Banish is particularly effective against the unholy, Holy simply obliterates everything in its area of effect that cannot withstand exposure to pure divinity. It is the goddess's judgment made manifest, a moment where heaven touches earth with such intensity that the unworthy cannot survive the contact. But the white mage's arsenal of light aspect judgment extends beyond raw destructive power. There are also the enfeebling spells, particularly Dia and its stronger variants. Dia is fascinating in its operation. It appears as a mark upon the target, a glowing sigil that marks them as subject to divine scrutiny. The spell inflicts damage over time, but more importantly, it exposes the enemy, weakening their defenses against physical attack. The lore interpretation is clear. Dia is a judgment that says, this one stands opposed to the light, and so the light will expose their weaknesses, will strip away their defenses, will ensure that they cannot hide from the consequences of their actions. It is particularly effective against undead and demons, creatures whose very existence is an affront to the natural order. The light of Dia burns them continuously, a persistent reminder that they are marked, that they have been weighed and found wanting, that divine attention is upon them and will not waver until they are destroyed or until they flee beyond the spell's reach. This aspect of white magic, the capacity for righteous destruction, is sometimes surprising to those who view white mages as pacifists or as being solely devoted to preservation. But there is no contradiction here. The same love that moves a white mage to heal also moves them to protect. And sometimes, protection requires the removal of threats that cannot be reasoned with, cannot be redeemed, can only be purified or destroyed. The white mage who smites the undead with Banish is performing an act of mercy, returning those trapped souls to their proper rest, ending their tortured existence as mockeries of life. The white mage who casts Holy against a demonic incursion is defending not just their immediate companions, but the fundamental principle that the mortal realm belongs to mortals, not to infernal invaders. This is the light against corruption, not light as mere illumination, but light as active force, as cleansing fire, as the cutting edge of divine will. It is a reminder that white mages serve a goddess of compassion, yes, but also of justice. And justice sometimes requires that evil not merely be opposed, but be utterly destroyed. Section 5. Faith among other casters. In the grand tapestry of Vana'diel's magical traditions, practitioners of the arcane arts occupy many roles and follow many paths. But among them all, certain fundamental dynamics define how they relate to one another, how they are perceived by the world, and what purposes they serve. The white mage stands as the natural counterpart to the black mage, two halves of a cosmic duality that defines much of how magic operates in this world. Where the Black Mage embodies raw destruction, channeling elemental fury to break and burn and freeze and shatter, the White Mage embodies preservation and protection. Where the Black Mage draws upon forces that tear down, the White Mage channels power that builds up. Fire and water, storm and calm, death and life. This is not antagonism. Black Mages and White Mages are not enemies, and in fact they often work closely together, their complementary abilities creating a balanced whole far greater than either could achieve alone. But the contrast is undeniable and intentional. The cosmos, in its wisdom, requires both types of power. There are things that must be destroyed, and there are things that must be preserved. To have only destruction or only preservation would leave the world unbalanced. The Black Mage pursues knowledge of destructive forces, masters the elements, learns to call down lightning from the heavens or summon blizzards from clear skies. Their power is immediate, dramatic, decisive. They solve problems through overwhelming force applied with precision. The White Mage, by contrast, pursues spiritual discipline and divine connection. Their power unfolds more subtly, a wound closing, a poison purged, a dead ally breathing again. Their solutions take time, require patience, demand faith that the goddess will provide what is needed when it is needed. But beyond this fundamental duality with Black Mages, White Mages also exist within a broader ecosystem of support-focused jobs. There are Red Mages, who blend offensive and defensive magics into a versatile but less specialized toolkit. There are Scholars, who approach healing from a more academic angle, using stratagems and accumulated knowledge. There are Bards and Dancers, and others who support through entirely different means. Yet among all of these, the White Mage occupies a unique position. They are the spiritual guardians of any party they join. Other support jobs may be effective, may be valuable, may even be preferred in certain situations. But they are fundamentally secular in nature. A Red Mage draws upon multiple magical traditions through personal study. A Scholar applies academic understanding to manipulate ether. These are impressive achievements, certainly, but they are ultimately about mastery through intellect and effort. The White Mage brings something different. They bring the direct intervention of divine power. When a party includes a White Mage, they are not simply gaining access to healing abilities. They are gaining a connection to the sacred, a representative of the goddess herself standing among them. This creates a particular dynamic. Parties rely on White Mages in ways that go beyond simple mechanical function. Yes, they need the healing desperately. Yes, they depend on bar spells and buffs and resurrection. But there is also a psychological and spiritual element. Having a White Mage present provides reassurance at a deep, almost primal level. It says, "We are not alone in this danger. We have someone whose very purpose is to ensure we survive. We have someone who channels divine grace." This reliance can be beautiful, but it can also be burden. The White Mage feels the weight of expectation constantly. Every party member who falls feels like a personal failure, even when circumstances made their death unavoidable. Every moment when MP runs low creates anxiety. What if someone needs healing, and I have nothing left to give? The spiritual guardian must always be ready, always vigilant, always prepared to give of themselves. And while some healing magic has spread to other jobs, the highest tiers remain uniquely sacred White Mage miracles. Anyone with a bit of training might learn to cast a weak cure spell, but the powerful restoration abilities, the full resurrection spells, the most potent protective blessings, these require the deep connection to divinity that only White Mages cultivate. This specialization is not accidental. It reflects a fundamental truth about the magic itself, that channeling divine power at its highest levels requires complete devotion. You cannot dabble in white magic and expect to master its greatest miracles. You cannot treat it as one tool among many in a varied toolkit. It demands everything, and in return, it grants access to power that literally defies death. So White Mages walk a somewhat lonely path, even when surrounded by companions. They are set apart by their calling, marked by their robes, defined by their connection to something beyond the mortal realm. Other casters may respect them, may appreciate their presence, may even envy their abilities. But few truly understand what it means to be a living conduit for divine will, to feel the goddess's power flowing through you with every spell cast, to know that you serve a purpose far greater than personal advancement or glory. This is the White Mage's place among other casters, essential, irreplaceable, and fundamentally distinct. Section 6. Miracles on the battlefield. There are moments in battle when everything hangs by the thinnest thread, when supplies run low and wounds run deep, when the enemy presses forward with relentless fury, when death stops being an abstract possibility and becomes an imminent certainty. These are the moments that separate true white mages from those merely going through the motions. These are the moments when faith becomes action, when prayer becomes power, when desperation meets divinity. And sometimes, in these darkest moments, miracles occur. Benediction is perhaps the most dramatic of these miracles, a spell that embodies everything white magic represents. In game mechanics, it is simple enough. Instantly restore all HP to all party members within range. But to understand what benediction truly means, you must picture the circumstances under which it is typically used. The party is on the brink of total collapse. Multiple members are at death's door, their HP bars nearly empty, their bodies broken and bleeding. The white mage themselves may be exhausted, their MP depleted from constant healing, their fingers cramped from gripping their staff for hour after hour of sustained battle. They have given everything they have, and it is not enough. Death is seconds away from claiming someone, maybe multiple someones. In this moment of ultimate crisis, the white mage reaches deeper than they ever have before. They cast aside concern for measured MP expenditure, forget about pacing and resource management. They open themselves completely to the divine, offering themselves as a vessel for as much power as the goddess chooses to channel. And they invoke benediction. What happens next is described by those who have witnessed it as overwhelming. A flood of divine grace, sudden and absolute, washes over the entire party. Wounds close instantly. Blood stops flowing. Broken bones knit themselves whole in the space between heartbeats. Every party member, no matter how close to death they were, finds themselves suddenly restored to full health, revitalized, ready to fight on. But more than the physical restoration, there is an emotional and spiritual component. Those touched by benediction report feeling a profound sense of peace, of being seen and valued by something vast and benevolent. For just an instant, they feel the goddess's direct attention upon them, and it is glorious and terrifying and comforting all at once. The white mage who casts benediction pays a price, though. The spell exhausts them completely, channeling so much divine power in such a short span that their body cannot help but suffer the strain. But they cast it anyway because that is what white mages do. They give of themselves, they sacrifice, they choose others' lives over their own comfort or safety. Then there is Asylum, a miracle of a different sort but no less profound. Where benediction is a moment of overwhelming restoration, Asylum is sustained divine protection. When a white mage casts Asylum, they create a holy sanctuary, a zone of blessed ground where the normal rules of combat are temporarily suspended. The spell manifests visibly, often as shimmering light that rises from the ground, or as a translucent barrier that forms a protective dome. Those standing within Asylum find themselves shielded from magical damage, protected from debilitating effects that would normally cripple or kill. Imagine you are a black mage, casting spell after spell, knowing that enemy casters are targeting you, that they seek to silence you or bind you, or simply blast you with sufficient force to end your life. You are vulnerable, robes offering no real protection, your focus entirely on maintaining your offensive barrage. And then you see it. The white mage plants their staff and light erupts around you, and suddenly you feel safe in a way you have not felt since the battle began. This is the gift of Asylum, not just mechanical protection, but psychological relief. It says to those within it, here, for a time, you are under divine protection. Here, the goddess herself has declared sanctuary. Fight without fear, because you are guarded. The white mage who maintains asylum must remain focused and faithful, channeling the spell continuously, holding open that connection between the divine realm and the battlefield. It is exhausting work, but they do it gladly because every second that asylum holds is another second their companions survive, another moment they can press their advantage or recover from disaster. These miracles, benediction and asylum and others like them, are not everyday spells to be cast casually. They are emergency powers, divine interventions reserved for the most desperate circumstances. But their very existence is a testament to the white mage's true role. They are not merely healers in the mundane sense. They are conduits for miracles, individuals whose faith is so strong that reality itself bends in response to their prayers. When they call out to the goddess in moments of crisis, she answers, not because they have earned her favor through some transactional arrangement, but because they have devoted their entire lives to being worthy vessels for her power. On the battlefield, surrounded by chaos and death and desperation, the white mage stands as a beacon of hope made manifest. They prove, again and again, that life is sacred and worth fighting for, that death can be denied, that protection can be granted, that miracles are not merely stories from ancient times, but present realities available to those with faith enough to channel them. This is white magic at its apex, not a series of spells memorized and executed, but a living connection to divinity that transforms impossible situations into survivable ones, that snatches victory from defeat's jaws, that reminds everyone present that they do not fight alone. Section 7. Pain, Sacrifice, and Devotion. To walk the path of the white mage is to embrace a fundamental truth that many find difficult to accept, that true healing, true protection, true service to others requires sacrifice. Not sacrifice in the abstract, not symbolic gestures, but real, tangible giving of oneself for the sake of others. This philosophy manifests in white magic in ways both subtle and explicit, woven through the job's very essence. Consider the concepts of afflatus solace and afflatus misery, two contrasting states that represent different facets of divine inspiration. These are not merely mechanical stances to be switched between for optimal efficiency, though they serve that purpose. They are spiritual conditions, different modes of channeling divine power that reflect different aspects of the goddess's nature and the white mage's relationship to suffering. Afflatus solace represents the gentle, nurturing aspect of divine grace. When a white mage enters the state, they become conduits for pure compassion, their healing spells empowered by an outpouring of mercy. This is the goddess as comforter, as the mother who soothes her children's hurts, as the benevolent force that seeks only to ease suffering wherever it is found. A white mage in afflatus solace feels this compassion flowing through them. Their healing spells carry an extra measure of grace. Their touch brings not just physical restoration, but emotional comfort. They become, for a time, perfect expressions of the healing impulse, desire for nothing but the well-being of those they serve. But there is another side to divine inspiration, another face of truth that white mages must sometimes embrace. Afflatus misery represents a darker understanding that pain exists, that suffering cannot always be prevented, and that sometimes the only response to witnessing hurt is to transform that anguish into righteous action. When a white mage enters the state, they do not deny the reality of suffering. Instead, they acknowledge it, accept it, and then turn it outward against those who caused it. In afflatus misery, the white mage's offensive, holy magic gains terrible power. Their banished spells burn brighter, their holy strikes harder. But this is not about revenge or hatred. It is about the understanding that mercy for the innocent sometimes requires severity toward the wicked, that to truly protect life you must sometimes take a stand against those who would destroy it. The transition between these two states, between solace and misery, between pure healing and righteous wrath, is part of the white mage's spiritual discipline. They must understand both, must be capable of embodying both, because the world requires both gentleness and strength, both forgiveness and justice. But even these philosophical considerations pale before the most explicit expressions of white magic's sacrificial nature, spells like martyr and devotion. Martyr is remarkable in its simplicity and profound in its implications. It allows a white mage to transfer their own HP directly to an ally. No conversion, no loss of efficiency, simply a direct giving of life force from one person to another. The mechanics are straightforward, but the meaning is staggering. Here is a spell that says, "Your life is more valuable than mine. Your survival is worth my suffering. I will diminish myself so that you may be made whole." When a white mage uses Martyr, they are not making a casual decision. They are choosing pain. They are accepting weakness. They are reducing their own capacity to survive so that someone else's capacity increases. This is sacrifice made literal, rendered in the most direct terms possible. I give my life for yours. And then there is devotion, which operates on the same principle, but with MP instead of HP. A white mage channels their own magical reserves into an ally, depleting themselves to replenish someone else. This is particularly profound because MP is the white mage's lifeblood, their ability to function. Without MP, they cannot heal, cannot protect, cannot resurrect. Yet devotion says, "I will give this up, I will render myself temporarily powerless, because your need is greater than mine." Imagine the trust this requires. The white mage using devotion must trust that their party will protect them while they are weakened. They must trust that the MP they sacrifice will be used well, that the ally they empower will use that gift to help the party survive. They must trust in the fundamental goodness and competence of those they serve. And imagine what it says to those receiving these gifts. To see your white mage deliberately hurt themselves so you can continue fighting, to witness someone literally giving their life force for your sake, it creates bonds that go beyond mere party mechanics. It creates genuine gratitude, respect, even love. This emphasis on giving rather than glory defines white mages at their core. They are not the ones who deal the killing blow to raid bosses. They are not the ones who top damage meters or receive public acclaim for spectacular displays of destructive power. Their contributions are quieter, but no less essential. They are the ones who stand in the back, watching health bars, anticipating damage, casting protective spells before the attack even lands. They are the ones who go unnoticed when everything goes right because if they're doing their job well, nobody feels like they were ever in danger. But when things go wrong, when the party wipes and people start assigning blame, the white mage feels it acutely, the sense of having failed in their fundamental duty. This can be a lonely existence. The glory goes to others while the weight of responsibility rests on the white mage's shoulders. But those who truly embrace the calling do not serve for glory. They serve because service itself is the point, because giving of themselves brings them closer to understanding the goddess's own nature, because they have learned that there is a profound satisfaction in being the reason others survive. They are quiet but indispensable pillars of any expedition, foundations upon which success is built. Without them, parties crumble. Without their constant vigilance and willingness to sacrifice, adventures end in tragedy. With them, the impossible becomes possible, the deadly becomes survivable, and death itself becomes merely a temporary setback. This is the heart of white magic, not power for power's sake, but power placed entirely in service of life, wielded by those willing to pour out everything they have so that others might continue on. Section 8. Mastery of the Divine. There is a distinction that must be made, in the end, between those who can cast healing spells and those who are truly white mages. Between those who have learned the words and gestures and those who have mastered the divine art itself. White mages possess top-tier divine magic skill, the highest in all of Vana'diel. This is not accidental. This is not simply a game mechanical balance decision. It reflects a fundamental truth about what white magic is and who white mages are. Every healing spell, every protective ward, every miracle of resurrection is not simply a technique executed, but a ritualized expression of sacred doctrine. When a white mage casts even the simplest cure spell, they are not merely following a learned procedure. They are participating in a religious rite, a moment of communion with the divine, a practiced and perfected form of prayer that has been refined over generations.